big man in a suit of armor. Take that off, what are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Of all the things to brag about in the Marvel universe, you really shouldn't lead with genius. The superhero job market is well saturated with geniuses, green monsters and stretchy guys who have no problem throwing together a rocket or a time machine if the occasion calls for it. And it all seems unnecessary. One should appreciate that folk heroes for most of human history weren't genius empiricists or inventors, but cunning and brave warriors who often owed their abilities to the gods of the heavens or nobility in their blood. The 20th century saw the rise of sci-fi and alien superheroes, but it was Marvel who took things a step further. The company introduced an entirely new pantheon of heroes, most of them the flawed genius type, who drew their powers directly from the well of science by way of their own remarkable inventions or radioactive happenstance. How did this happen? Why does the Marvel movie you're watching seem so entrenched in what we might call pretend science? Well, the answer is here. What you're looking at is an American atomic bomb test from 1959. 14 years earlier, at the close of World War II, the US dropped 2 of these on Japan. It was the unveiling of civilization's off switch, a terrifying invention that could render one's enemies extinct in one irradiated fell swoop. Subsequent innovation in nuclear weapons occurs amidst the backdrop of the Cold War, the rivalry wherein the United States moves to limit the Soviet Union's proliferation of totalitarian communism. The US expands its own geopolitical influence while touting the mission of liberal democracy, but in practice, both powers launch invasions the world over, foment revolutions, and frequently prop up regimes that violently suppress opposition. All of this, in a sense, remains secondary to the technological rivalry between the Soviet Union and the US, the nuclear arms race. Each missile test and space race rocket launch becomes a show of force. And when the Soviet Union launches the first ever satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, Americans panic. Politicians like JFK win votes capitalizing on paranoia about a so-called missile gap, the unfounded idea that Soviet weaponry has radically outpaced American capabilities. In 1961, as the dark cloud of nuclear annihilation hangs over the US, a company known as Atlas Comics rebrands itself as Marvel. The writer-editor Stan Lee rings in this new era with a group of characters called the Fantastic Four. It starts here. The genius rocket scientist Reed Richards finds himself on the front lines of the Cold War space race, and he hastily blasts off into space in order to beat the commies. But on the mission, Reed and his crew are exposed to cosmic rays that endow them with, well, fantastic powers. In this era, it makes a lot of sense to cast a scientist as a hero for the youth. The US government and increasingly American society reconceptualize science as the most important aspect of national defense. The US needs up-and-coming scientific minds to develop stronger nuclear weapons and a capable missile defense system. This sentiment might explain why my old high school, built in the 50s and 60s, greets incoming students with images of stars, telescopes, and a nuclear explosion. Indeed, the year following the Sputnik launch, the US passes the National Defense Education Act, which pours $1 billion into supporting science at schools and universities. As the House report supporting the bill states, the very survival of our free country may depend in large part upon the education we provide for our young people now. In this radioactive space age, the saving grace, the righteous heroes, will emerge not from the ranks of valiant infantry, like Marvel's World War II staple Captain America, but rather from the classrooms and laboratories of erudite students. Stan Lee and his colleagues seem acutely aware of this cultural shift. He follows up the Fantastic Four with a new character, the atomic scientist Bruce Banner. Banner insists he's a scientist, not a man of action, in what seems a subtle nod to the obsolescence of that very dichotomy. For it's Banner's scientific genius, exposure to his own gamma-ray bomb, that turns him into the Hulk. Many of the big names of Marvel in the early 60s followed this same trajectory. We see the gifted young Peter Parker attend an exhibit on nuclear science, where a radioactive spider bites him and turns him into Spider-Man. And of course, the brilliant and charming arms manufacturer Tony Stark simply invents his own power suit to defeat his Vietnamese communist captors and become Iron Man. Lest there remain any doubt concerning how exactly an American should harness the fruits of technological innovation, all of these heroes hone their powers fighting communists. Iron Man takes on the Crimson Dynamo in the Soviet femme fatale Black Widow. The Hulk discovers his lab partner Igor is a spy passing atomic secrets to the giant-headed Soviet scientist called the Gargoyle. And Spider-Man's first real villain is the Chameleon, who, as you might have guessed, is working for the Soviets. He's a spy who can shapeshift to resemble other people and embed himself into American society, a clear reflection of societal fears about Soviet espionage. Given politicians' undemocratic witch hunts for communist sympathizers and jingoistic American propaganda, it's quite easy to deride American Cold War fears as the unthinking reactions of an ignorant populace, but these were grave times. Soviet agents were in fact embedded in federal agencies and universities. The American Communist Party and front organizations functioned as the domestic arm of a hostile foreign government, and the world came very close to nuclear war. Children were trained to find cover in the event of a bombing, while their parents watched public service announcements about surviving nuclear apocalypse. Stan Lee reflected on his post-1960 comics.
When communism was the big bugaboo here in America, almost all our villains were communists. And no matter what the problem was in society at the time, it sort of would show itself in our books.
If Marvel shows signs of obsession with science and technology, it's because many of its heroes were born out of a culture that could scarcely focus on much else. Marvel's footing in the real world made the heroes icons who dispatched genuine threats and gallantly explored scientific possibility. When the US finally reached the moon in 1969, astronauts disembarked to explore the foreign world and stared back at Earth from the barren rock. Marvel had actually forecasted this event in 1963, with a slight difference. The Fantastic Four touched down on the lunar surface to find none other than an army of communist super apes. Close enough. With superheroes, comics promoted the idea that nuclear science could save the Earth. I learned from the documentary The New Fire Fusion Revolution that many believe it still can. As global temperatures rise and civilization scrounges for clean sources of energy, the documentary features experts from MIT and Berkeley who argue that nuclear energy is the most practical way to power the world without fossil fuels. I know that whatever you currently believe about the subject, it'll give you something to think about. History Dose viewers can take advantage of a special holiday offer. Buy one, get one free gift card for an annual membership by clicking on the link in the description. You'll have access to the New Fire Fusion Revolution, as well as Magellan's huge catalog of 3,000 history documentaries. And they're adding new documentaries in history, crime, and science every single week. So click that link and you can start streaming these through your TV, mobile device, laptop, or other streaming device right away.